Law 5. You must lean in to bizarre behavior.
Lean into bizarre behavior, huh? Like that.
Yeah, it's a good one, right? Especially these days. I mean, think about it. Technology is changing faster than ever. The world is in constant flux. Feels like every other day there's some new trend or innovation that's supposed to revolutionize everything.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It can be hard to keep up, let alone figure out which of those things are actually going to stick around.
Exactly. And that's where Bartlett's Law 5 comes in. It's
Yeah.
all about how we react to these changes, how we approach those things that seem, well, bizarre.
Right, right. So it's less about the actual innovations themselves and more about our mindset, how we approach them.
You got it. And Bartlett argues that we have two basic options. We can either lean in or lean out.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lean in versus lean out. Break that down for me a bit. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, he actually kicks off this whole discussion with a really compelling story. It's about a music store CEO. Now, this CEO was absolutely convinced that physical music, CDs, vinyl records, that was the only way to go, no matter what.
I think I see where this is going.
Yeah, he was so set in his ways, so attached to this idea of physical music, that he completely ignored the rise of digital music, completely dismissed it, thought it was a fad, that people would always want to hold a physical album in their hands.
Oh, I can already feel the cognitive dissonance brewing.
Exactly. And, of course, you know what happened. The CEO went under, clinging to his beliefs while the world moved on without him.
It's a classic tale, isn't it? The stubborn refusal to adapt, to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, there's a better way.
Right. And that's exactly what Bartlett calls leaning out. It's that almost arrogant refusal to learn and adapt, driven by, as you said, that good old cognitive dissonance.
You know, it's funny how often we use that term cognitive dissonance, but I think it's worth pausing for a moment to really define what it means, especially in this context.
Totally agree. I feel like we hear it thrown around all the time, but do we really understand what's going on in our brains when we experience it?
Right. So, in a nutshell, cognitive dissonance is that mental discomfort we feel when we're holding two conflicting beliefs or when our actions don't align with our beliefs. It's like this internal alarm bell that goes off saying, hey, something's not right here.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does that relate to this idea of leaning out?
Think about it like this. That music store CEO, he was experiencing cognitive dissonance big time. He believed that physical music was superior, but he was also seeing the world move towards digital. Those two beliefs clashed, and it created this inner tension.
So to ease that tension, to silence that alarm bell, he doubled down on his existing beliefs, even though the evidence was staring him right in the face.
Exactly, and that's what leaning out often looks like. It's that refusal to acknowledge uncomfortable truths because they challenge our deeply held beliefs, our understanding of the world.
And it's not just limited to this one music store CEO, right?
Yeah.
Bartlett gives a bunch of other examples in the book. People who, despite their success, fell into the same trap of leaning out.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about Clifford Stoll, who wrote that infamous Newsweek article predicting that the internet would fail.
Ironically, in a publication that later moved entirely online.
The irony is thick, isn't it? And then there's the bank president who told Henry Ford that the automobile was just a passing fad.
Oh, and don't forget Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel. He completely dismissed the idea of personal communicators.
Yeah. And of course, there's the classic example of Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft, literally laughing off the iPhone's potential.
It's amazing, isn't it? These incredibly successful people, leaders in their industries, all falling prey to the same kind of thinking.
And you know, in many cases, this leaning out cost them dearly. They lost market share, they missed out on opportunities, they became relics of a bygone era, all because they couldn't or wouldn't adapt.
So if leaning out is the path to obsolescence, then leaning in must be the key to staying ahead of the curve. But what does that actually look like?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we'll be diving into much deeper as we continue our exploration of Bartlett's Law 5. So how do we actually do it? How do we lean into those things that make us uncomfortable, that challenge our preconceived notions?
Well, Bartlett suggests that it starts with self-awareness. It's about recognizing that we're all susceptible to cognitive dissonance, that we all have these deeply ingrained beliefs that can blind us to new possibilities.
That makes sense. We need to be able to step back and question our own reactions, our own resistance to new ideas.
Exactly. He even suggests we keep a dissonance diary, where we jot down those moments when we feel that inner tension, that urge to reject something outright.
Oh, I like that. A dissonance diary. It's like a journal for our mental blind spots.
Right. And by tracking these moments, by reflecting on why we're reacting the way we are, we can start to identify the patterns in our thinking. We can start to see those areas where we're most prone to leaning out.
So it's about bringing those unconscious biases to the surface, making them conscious so we can actually work with them.
You got it. And then, Bartlett says, we can start to actively challenge those biases. Instead of avoiding information that makes us uncomfortable, we can seek it out. We can deliberately expose ourselves to different perspectives, even those we might initially disagree with.
You mean like instead of just scrolling past an article that challenges our political beliefs, we actually click on it and try to understand the opposing viewpoint?
Exactly. It's about actively engaging with those ideas that make us squirm a bit, that force us to reconsider our assumptions.
Because, let's be honest, those are often the ideas that have the most potential to change our minds, to help us grow.
Totally. And it's not just about consuming information, right? It's also about surrounding ourselves with people who challenge us. Bartlett talks about the importance of having a diverse network, people who come from different backgrounds, who hold different opinions.
Yeah. It's easy to get stuck in those echo chambers where everyone agrees with you, but that's not how you learn and grow.
Right. If everyone around you is nodding along, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. You're probably not exposing yourself to those truly bizarre ideas that could change the game. He even suggests something pretty radical, following people on social media who you disagree with.
Whoa, now that's a challenge. It's like willingly inviting those uncomfortable conversations into your life.
But think about it. If you're only exposed to one side of the story, how can you ever truly understand the issue? How can you form your own informed opinions?
That's a great point. It's like we all know that social media algorithms can trap us in these echo chambers, but we often just accept it as the norm.
Right. But Bartlett's saying, hey, we have the power to break free from those echo chambers. We can actively seek out different perspectives. We can engage with those who challenge our beliefs.
And in doing so, we might just stumble upon those truly groundbreaking, world-changing ideas that we would have otherwise missed.
So it's not just about personal growth. It's about being better equipped to navigate a world that's constantly changing, a world where those who can adapt, who can embrace the bizarre, will thrive.
It's about recognizing that discomfort isn't always a bad thing. In fact, it can be a sign that we're stretching ourselves, that we're pushing beyond our comfort zones and into new territory.
Exactly. So we've talked about the importance of self-awareness, of actively seeking out diverse perspectives, of surrounding ourselves with people who challenge us. But are there any, concrete techniques that we can use to actually lean in when faced with something that feels truly bizarre?
That's a great question, and it leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some specific strategies for putting this leaning in mindset into practice. All right, so we've talked about the mindset, the importance of self-awareness, seeking out diverse perspectives, surrounding ourselves with people who challenge us, but how do we actually lean in when faced with something that just feels, well, bizarre?
Yeah, what are the actual practical steps we can take? Because it's easy to talk about being open-minded, but it's a whole other thing to actually put it into practice.
Totally. And Bartlett doesn't just leave us hanging with these high-level concepts. He actually offers some very concrete techniques for leaning in. One of the most interesting ones, and I think this is especially relevant in today's world, is the idea of holding two opposing ideas in your mind simultaneously.
Whoa, okay, hold on. How do you do that? That sounds almost impossible, like my brain would just short circuit.
I know, right? It sounds counterintuitive. But Bartlett actually borrowed this idea from a pretty incredible source, Shimon Peres.
Shimon Peres, as in the former president of Israel.
The one and only. Bartlett tells this story about how Peres once said to him, "You have to be able to hold two opposing ideas in your mind at the same time and still be able to function." And when you think about it, Peres was dealing with some of the most complex, seemingly intractable conflicts in the world. He had to be able to see both sides, to understand the nuances, to find those tiny slivers of common ground.
Yeah, wow. That's a whole other level of leaning in, isn't it?
Right. And Bartlett argues that we can apply the same principle to any situation where we're faced with something that seems bizarre, that challenges our existing beliefs. Instead of immediately rejecting it, we can try to hold it in our minds alongside our own perspective.
So it's like instead of saying this is wrong, we say, okay, I see how this could be true, even though it conflicts with what I currently believe.
Exactly. It's about creating space for that cognitive dissonance, that discomfort, instead of trying to squash it. And then from that space, we can start to ask ourselves some important questions.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, Bartlett suggests we ask ourselves things like, Why do I believe what I believe? Could I be wrong? Am I leaning out simply because I don't understand? Am I just following the crowd?
Those are some pretty powerful questions.
Yeah.
I could see how just asking those questions could really shift your perspective. It's like you're forcing yourself to confront your own biases, your own assumptions.
And sometimes just that act of self-reflection can be enough to open us up to new possibilities. It can help us move from that knee-jerk reaction of, this is bizarre, to a more nuanced understanding of why we're reacting that way.
You know, it's funny, as we're talking about this, I'm realizing that leaning in isn't just about embracing new ideas. It's also about being more compassionate, more empathetic towards those who hold different views.
Oh, absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone is coming from their own unique perspective, their own set of experiences and beliefs. And even if we disagree with those beliefs, we can still try to understand where they're coming from.
It's about replacing judgment with curiosity. Instead of saying this person is wrong,
Hmm.
we can ask what has led this person to believe this.
Right. And that shift in perspective, that willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes can be incredibly powerful. It can open up all sorts of new possibilities for connection, for understanding, for collaboration.
So, in a way, leaning into bizarre behavior is really about leaning into our own humanity. It's about embracing the fact that we're all complex, flawed, ever-evolving beings, and that the world is full of mystery and wonder.
Perfectly said. It's about letting go of the need to be right, to have all the answers, and instead approaching the world with a sense of curiosity, humility, and a willingness to be surprised.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another deep dive complete. We explored the power of leaning into bizarre behavior, a concept that's especially relevant in our rapidly changing world. We talked about the importance of self-awareness, seeking out diverse perspectives, and surrounding ourselves with people who challenge us. And we explored some concrete techniques for putting this leaning in mindset into practice.
Remember, it's not about blindly accepting everything new or different, but rather about approaching it with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to challenge our own beliefs.
So as you go about your week, I encourage you to pay attention to those moments when you feel that resistance, that urge to lean out. Take a deep breath, pause, and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What possibilities might I be missing out on? Challenge yourself to lean in and explore. You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a great takeaway. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep leaning in.